I'm going to guess that holiday times around the homes of many of you are like holiday times were around my parents' house or my grandparents' home when we were growing up. To gather together a large number of family members, including my aunt and uncle and their children, our family, grandmas and grandpas, meant that quite often, especially when we gathered at grandma's house, there wasn't enough room for everyone around the dining room table. And so guess what happened? Out came a couple of card tables, and there was the kids' table set up. See, Norma's nodding her head. She can identify with this immediately. And us kids, we were seated at the table. And yet in the back of our minds, there was always that hope that someday soon, we will be big enough to move up to the adult table. Does that sound familiar? Yep, I can see, based on the smiles and the nodding of the heads, that sounds familiar. And yet we all had to learn that we had that place that we had to go to. If we were a child, we had to go to the children's table and await our turn to be invited up to the adult table. And how wonderful that felt when we knew that we had finally made it there. I'm often befuddled, I think, by the competitive streak that has grown much stronger in our world over these last few years. I was visiting with a family who have some young kids not all that long ago, and their 8-year-old is a soccer player. And apparently, she's quite a good soccer player because she's a member of an 8-year-old's soccer team. But it completely floored me when I learned that this was an 8-year-old's soccer team that is a travel team. Wow. That kind of competitiveness, though, has begun to insinuate itself pretty deeply into our lives. No longer is it sufficient just for a bunch of 8-year-olds to go run around in a field for a while kicking a ball. They now have to have team uniforms and travel stuff and spend weekends on the road playing soccer. But think about how that competitiveness has insinuated itself not only into the lives of our children and their activities, but into the lives of us adults too. These days, for those of us who live in the work environment, more often than not, we know that we undergo an annual evaluation, don't we? And quite often, annual evaluations these days are not so much based on whether or not we're performing up to our potential, whether or not we improved based on last year's evaluation. More often than not, annual evaluations now are based on how our performance compares to the person next to us who may be performing the same job. And in order for us to merit a raise or to move one step up the ladder in the company, we have to perform better than the person next to us. It doesn't matter whether or not we're performing up to our potential, as long as we're performing better than they are. I found myself in Ann Arbor a few weeks ago at the annual Ann Arbor Art Fair. It's quite a big thing these days, and it gathers together hundreds of artists from all across the country. And I went down one day just to browse. I hadn't been there in about 10 years. And I went down to browse mainly because I can't afford anything that gets sold at the Ann Arbor Art Fair. It has too many zeros in the price tag. But I also go there just to admire the beautiful art that's worked by so many artists. And there was the work of one particular artist who's a sculptor that really caught my eye. And it was particularly beautiful work that she does in both wood and stone. And I had to catch myself before I asked this question. How many awards have you won? Have you entered any competitions lately with this beautiful work? I had to catch myself from asking that question. It wasn't enough just to admire the beauty of the work that she does in both wood and stone. My mind had said, aha, let's see how she does in competition with other sculptors. Who cares about how beautiful the work itself may be? How many ribbons, awards, plaques has she gathered up? That's how insidious this competitiveness can be in our lives. And it's that kind of competitiveness, it's that unwillingness to take our turn and sit at the kids' table, so to speak. It's that kind of competitiveness that begins to draw a line, and on one side of the line we put the somebodies, and on the other side of the line we put the nobodies. The somebodies, they're the good competitors. They're the ones who keep advancing. The nobodies, they're the ones that, well, maybe they don't work so well, so we don't pay attention so much to them. We leave them behind. And then there is Jesus, who speaks a powerful message against that line between the somebodies and the nobodies. I was reminded of that by a story that I ran across on the web not all that long ago. Do any of you know a woman by the name of Osceola McCarty? No one's raising their hand. I would be surprised if any of you knew Osceola. But you've heard her story. Osceola works for one of our local universities. She's worked in the university laundry all her life. And at the age of 87, after a lifetime of scrimping and saving and being the very frugal person that her parents raised her to be, Osceola in turn was able to make a gift to the university of $150,000 saved over the course of her working life. And the gift that she gave was for scholarships to assist underprivileged kids who come from a background similar to her own. Now, before Osceola made that gift, the world probably would have said, she's a nobody. She works in a laundry. She works 8, 10, 12 hours a day, 5, sometimes 6 days a week. She goes home, she minds her own business, but she's never in the spotlight. She works her job. She's a good citizen. It was only after we discovered that Osceola made this gift to a university that we decided, well, maybe she is a somebody. And she wound up on a talk show, and she wound up with a story on the web. I think Jesus is trying to say, though, that Osceola was a somebody before even our attention landed on her. Because even if we don't pay attention to people like Osceola, God pays attention. And those that we count as the nobodies on the other side of the line, God always accounts them as somebody in His eyes. We learn that lesson each time we gather here in church to celebrate and to receive the Eucharist. We do it in a very beautiful but a very subtle way. In a few minutes, people will be called forward in procession to come and to receive the Eucharist. As people come forward in procession, though, notice how we come forward. There will be no elbows shoving people out of the way. The Zumeras are laughing because there may be elbows being thrown in their row, but not in general. There are no elbows shoving people out of the way. We don't say that what we receive here, this Eucharist, is reserved just for the brightest, the most beautiful, the most successful. We don't make any of those distinctions. Instead, we will come forward in beautiful procession, quietly, patiently, waiting to receive this gift, being called forward up to this table, so to speak, to receive the gift of the Eucharist. You see, the lesson that I think that Jesus is trying to teach us, the lesson that we reinforce in one another as we come forward, especially at communion time, with such reverence and beauty, is that although all of us at one point or another may feel like a nobody, there's no real distinguishing feature about us, there's nothing outstanding about my life, there's no particular thing that draws attention to me, although from time to time we may feel like nobodies in our eyes, what we learn here each and every day we gather here is that each of us, old or young, rich or poor, famous or not, it makes no difference. Each of us are somebody in God's eyes.